was 16 when my struggle with mental health started, and it was in lockdown, so it was already quite a lonely time for me, and being locked down didn't help that. I just felt like there was no one there, and over the months I started talking to people less and less, which kind of what was the beginning for me. Got to a point where I wasn't speaking to any of my friends, I was barely speaking to my family, and before that I was always a very bubbly person, loved speaking to people, loved spending time with everyone, and when we came out of lockdown my anxiety was so much higher, which didn't help the situation, and it got to a point where I didn't want to go out, I didn't want to see people, and when I did, I'd just be walking down the road or something and I'd feel like everyone was staring at me, talking about me, which really made my life very hard, and I really struggled on how to cope, and that just made my mental health go down and down and down. It was just a really lonely point in my life, and it would get to the point where anything would set me off. I would just have meltdowns over nothing, and I just had them especially at night in my room. I'd just be crying, and I just felt even more lonely, and that just put me even more into a dark place and a dark hole that I was already sort of getting into, which just made everything worse. And it was when we had just come out of lockdown, that was sort of when, you know, the self-harming started, and that was, even though it wasn't constructive and it didn't help, it made me feel like I was getting my emotions out in a way that I had previously struggled to do. And I cut my arms, my legs, anywhere, and because as well we had just come out when it was in summer, and so I hadn't really been out at all in the summer, and then it got to autumn and it was easy to cover that up because of hoodies and the clothes that I was wearing, and no one really noticed because I hadn't opened up to anyone, so no one was noticing anyway, which just made it feel like no one cared, even though I hadn't told anyone. I just kind of wanted someone to notice that I wasn't doing okay and make me feel cared. But it's also like when I did try and speak to people, you'd get all of the, oh, there's people going through worse stuff, and like everyone would just compare, and it just made me feel like what I was going through wasn't severe enough that I needed help, or it didn't matter to anyone. With my friends, when I went back to school afterwards, and at this point I was self-harming quite a bit, and I didn't have many friends because I'd lost a lot of them through not speaking to them or just everyone growing apart. But for me, I only had two main support systems going through, and it just made things harder because it was also like I didn't want to burden them by opening up, and I just felt like it wasn't worth opening up because people had worse stuff going on than me. Like, I didn't need help, I could deal with it myself, and it was just, you underestimate the situation because you're always thinking about other people and that they could have it worse than you, when in reality, like, you need help just as much and you deserve that help. I was also scared of being judged because my anxiety was so high at that point as well that I already felt like wherever I went someone was judging me. It was either how I looked, what I was wearing, what I was doing. So my self-awareness radar was already like pretty high, and I just was so scared of people judging me and telling me there was something wrong with me, and I didn't want to feel that ashamedness that I felt from doing what I was doing. But I also felt because I was doing it to myself, it didn't really affect anyone else, and no one cared that I was doing it, and I just thought that everyone would be ashamed of me and wouldn't want to like know me because of what I was doing. But it's also one of those things that I was also telling myself they're not going to. Like, you're really in a mental battle with yourself over it, because on one hand you're telling yourself, no, it's okay, they'll be there for you, you can get help, but on the other hand you're saying, this is the method that I found to cope with what's going on and it's working for me. And it got to a point one night where I just couldn't do it anymore. I just genuinely couldn't. I was at the point where I just thought no one cared, and I just thought things would be better off for me to not be there. So I took loads of pills and I went to sleep hoping that I wouldn't wake up the next morning. And I think that was honestly, it was a point that I knew I really needed help. But for me at the time, your emotions get so big and overwhelming that that is the only thing that I felt like would help. And so I went to sleep, and the next morning I woke up, but I was very ill and not myself and groggy and very out of it. And I was very upset that it hadn't worked, but I also felt I couldn't tell anyone, so I just kind of carried on with my day as normal. I went to school and my friends were there, and one of them I had spoken to the night before, and she was very worried about me anyway. But I told her, no, I'm fine, because at this point I was just, if anyone asked me, I was also pretending that I was fine and that nothing was wrong. She came and spoke to me, and she noticed because I was out of it. I could barely speak, and she found me, and she looked at me and instantly knew that something was not quite right. And she took me and we spoke, and that was for me the point where, even though she wasn't a professional, she was just one of my friends, that was the point for me where I finally realised that I can't do this anymore, I need some help. And she's the person that I trusted the most at that time. And it got to a point where I couldn't hold it anymore, and I just burst out crying, and I was telling her I'm sorry, and I opened up to her. And that was also when my school and my parents found out, because obviously I had to see the doctor and hospital and make sure that everything was okay. And she stood by me the whole way, and it was at that point where I really realised that everything that I had been telling myself, that I was scared of experience like judgment, it wasn't. It was nothing like that. It was pure supportiveness. And it also made me wish that I'd asked help sooner, that I hadn't let that voice in my head tell me that you were going to be judged for it, because I had nothing to be ashamed about. I was struggling and I didn't know what to do. I got help. I saw a therapist who I still see, and I have updates to my family. We chat a lot more. I opened up to them, because as well, it's hard telling your parents that you're struggling, because they're not as open as with their mental health as we should be. I still struggled for a bit. There was no change overnight. I still struggled for a couple of months, but I also found more productive ways of dealing with it, and just knowing that I wasn't alone. And I managed to find other people who had gone through what I had gone through, because when you're going through it, you feel like you're genuinely the only person in the world who's going through that. So to meet other people who are going through it, it helps, and you find your support systems, and it's just, I'm so grateful that even though it got to that point, which that was why I opened up, that it happened, and I don't regret it for 1 minute that it happened. Because, people say to you, oh, you can talk to us, but it's not as easy as that. You need to feel safe and secure when you're doing it, and I think that was part of the issue. I didn't, which is why it took me so long. And I think that it's just not spoken about enough, and there's not enough awareness about it that you can feel comfortable. And I wish that had been spoken about more, and that people seemed less judgmental about it, because I think a lot of people, when you say to them, oh, I'm suffering with mental health or self-harm, something, they're just oh, just stop, just be happy. It's not an easy fix, and there were so many things that led up to my personal struggle. It is serious, and it is not spoken about enough, and there's just kind of this image there of that anything to do with mental health is just, there's something fully wrong with you, you shouldn't, there's something wrong with you, when there's not. There is nothing wrong with you at all. You're going through a life struggle that everyone will go through at some point, and people don't open up, and that's why people do what they do. And I just think people need to speak about it more, and I think it's really important to speak up and speak out. And if someone asks you're okay, don't just say the usual answer of yeah, I'm fine. Open up to them. Yes, people might have stuff going on in their own lives, but I think they would rather hear about it than you struggling alone in silence. But like, it does get better, and it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time, but it got better, and there's things that I've definitely learnt from it.